of Washington Historical Society meeting on Thursday, June 28, in the year 2001. And tonight we are meeting at the Nine Partners Meeting House in Millbrook, which was built in 1780, and it overlooks the Nine Partners Cemetery. David Greenwood, our town historian, will take us inside to see the original furnishings, hear its history, and feel the presence of the early worshipers. David will then lead us through a stroll through the cemetery and show us the early Quakers that lived here and are buried there.
To the Nine Partners Meeting House. I appreciate the fact that it's a warm summer evening and there are lots of conflicts. I apologize for last week with the weather. We weren't at all sure what would be happening at 7 o'clock in the evening. So at 3:30 in the afternoon it looked pretty bleak and we made the decision to postpone it. People may be joining us, they may not. But the important thing is that we're here, and we're here because of the topic and because we want to find out more about it, then we all benefit. And hopefully we'll be able to share our trip this evening in the future with friends who may be interested in it. The Nine Partners Meeting House, the Society of Friends, the building that we're in, is from the 1780s. An earlier structure was built by 1760, a log structure. But by 1780, it was replaced with the building that you see today. Some of you have a strong working knowledge of the Quaker tradition. And those of you who are attendees at Wild Federated know that every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, there is a service. No, I can't say the service. There is a meeting that takes place that is based on the Quaker tradition. And that happens every Sunday. So if you'd like to come back for it, I'm sure you'd be welcome. What's interesting about the building, and let me talk about it from an architectural point of view, we're actually in a machine. Now, it's hard to think of a building as being a machine, but even your homes are machines. They're designed to function. We have bedrooms, we have private areas, we have public areas, we have areas for the preparation of food. It's a machine. In the meeting house, the function of that machine is pretty obvious. If you look around, you'll realize while we've got one large space, the space is actually divided into multiples. If you look behind us, you will see that there are dividers, and it's designed so that the large space could be cut up into 4 small spaces. If we were to take these out, the panels would drop down, separating this half of the meeting house from that half. The reason for it was that in the process of the Quaker administration, women and men would have separate organizational responsibilities, and the women would be on one side, the men would be on the other. You'll also notice that there are holes or peg holes, so that floorboards, you'll notice, could be dropped from the middle section at the end, and then floorboards would be put on top of those supports, thereby effectively making another room directly above our head. You could have 4, or 3, or 2, or open it up, and you could have 1. That design served very well the organizational structure. Quakers. When Kurt came in, he asked if there were ministers. Well, yes and no. The normal service structure was a community of friends, a fellowship of friends, and some who would be senior would be sitting on the higher pews or benches. But there was no one standard official leader, although they could very easily have guests that would come in from other meeting houses to share their stories or their testimonies. What's interesting about the building today, in the year 2001, is that it is an extraordinary survivor. It's never been painted. The wood, mostly chestnut, by the way, chestnut and white pine, is exactly the same way that it was when it was constructed over 200 years ago. The benches, by and large, are 200 years old. A few pieces of furniture also date to them. The plate stoves that you see are probably 1820, 1825. Not the original, but close to it. What I find interesting about the benches, by the way, if we look to the backs of them, you'll find that even 100 years ago, children got bored. And we find the names of Swift and Coffin and Haight, all the names that we know, are carved into the backs with messages. And it's charming. I think that's part of the legacy of the building as well. Any questions so far?
I have a question about,
Yes.
when was it they divided up the men and the women? Not all the time.
No. The services were always, the meetings were always combined. They would never separate. It was only for the administrative ends of it that they would divide up and have administrative responsibilities that would be different, parallel elders and so on. But for the meetings, everyone was equal. Another aspect, yes?
Men and women kept separate meetings.
Yes. Thank you. Separate minutes. Some of you know, hopefully all of you know Bill McDermott. Bill is visiting today from Clinton Corners. There are 5 meeting houses in Dutchess County that form a network of the Quaker story in this part of New York State. And all of the buildings are on the National Register. That went through how many years ago, Bill? So all of the buildings. Some of you have visited other ones. We've got them on Quaker Hill, from Elbow, Clinton, Bull's Head, and they form an extraordinary story. Any other questions? Yes. That's so, on the second level, it's pitched so that the benches, each one steps back on the stage so that they can see down into the open space. It's very well thought out, very well designed.
Dave, you know, this stove looks unique to me. Is this looks like a concrete almost?
It's the plate iron. They're called plate stoves. Sometimes 6 plate, 8 plate, but they're actually iron, heavy iron pieces that are plugged together. Tonight, what we will be doing?
One question. Is there any way that this quote, end quote, wonderful graffiti in the back can be like a rubbing of some sort? Is there any way, it would help to really appreciate what is there, even though it's very, very insignificant, 1 little inch, it might be significant over the whole thing.
And that's a great project. Pardon me? That's a great project. If anyone knows of an Eagle Scout looking for something to do, that's a natural.
Is there a way to do it, Dave, that you know of?
Photograph, you can do rubbings. There are lots of ways of getting
I think it would be well worth
and documented.
because it is rather unique and intriguing.
So, Gene, maybe when you finish with the movie.
This is only the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, but it is a wonderful document. I agree. It's,
So you gotta get rid of the
story
red
people.
Who does this building belong to and who maintains it?
The building actually now is part, technically the building is under the aegis of the 9 Partners Burial Association, which is an incorporated private organization that was created when Phoebe Thorne died in 1909. Phoebe Thorne was part of the Thorne family, we'll talk about her later. And on her death, her inheritance was bequeathed through this building and maintenance of this cemetery. So it is privately endowed. For all practical purposes, though, it's under the aegis of Lyell Federated Church, because Lyell Federated Church is a federated church that includes Dutch Reform and Quaker. And what's the third? Methodist, thank you. So, combination. So In reality, the people who sit on the board of the 9 partners are actually, I think, all members of Lyle Federated. At least they were before. So I'm assuming that they still are.
David, I
Yes.
just was there a wood preservative or something put on this? This is just natural.
It's all natural. And the color, we know metal oxidizes. If you look at the rust on clay stove, it's oxidized. Wood oxidizes too. That's why it has that wonderful golden mellow quality. A lot of people don't realize how extensive chestnut was used. Chestnut was one of the major building materials. In our generation, it's gone. So people say, oh, it's oak. But no, it's almost exclusively chestnut. And it was much easier to use than oak. Any other questions?
Could you make a comment about the architecture?
The brick, something I find amusing, the way brick is put together, there are certain traditions, common, bond. If you think of a brick as being a rectangle, there's something called the stretcher and the head. The stretcher is the long end of the brick. The head is the short. And to make a strong wall, you could have stretcher, head, stretcher, head, stretcher, head, stretcher, head. You follow as you're laying up the wall. The bricks are usually 2 bricks thick, so the wall is thicker than just 1 unit. And by varying it, it ties them together. That's a standard way of doing it. But another way that's a little faster is stretcher, 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 stretcher. 1 row. Stretcher, 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 2 rows. Stretcher, 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 3 rows. Stretcher, stretcher, right up to the 5th, and then the 5th row ends up being header, 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 header. Different pattern. There are Dutch traditions, Flemish traditions, and English traditions, all on how the bricks are put together. We think of the Quakers as respecting and admiring integrity and simplicity. The interior of the building certainly reinforces that. When we get outside, I want you to notice something about the brickwork, because the 3 walls are done in one style, but the rear of the building is done in a different style. And I think you can make some conclusions when you look at it. But that's a surprise for outside. Any other comments?
Was the brick the typical structure?
Brick is structural.
I mean, wasn't the typical Quaker house?
Keep in mind where Quakers are coming from. Pennsylvania, brick is a standard material. Eastern Long Island, you will find it. Wood is very common. Stone, as a matter of fact, our 5 varieties, Neil Larson, in a survey and a research project, the 5 Quaker meeting houses that we have in the county all are quite different. From rough glacial stone, like Carmelvo, brick, where this one is, clapboard, and shakes, which is what the Quaker meeting house on Quaker Hill would have been. They're all variants. So a lot has to do with what the individual community was comfortable making. We have quite a variety.
Yeah, just a comment.
Yes.
Clay is very rare. This brick clay is very rare in this area. So that this brick had to come from quite a distance, and probably up along the Hudson on the other side. So somebody went through a lot of trouble to get the brick kiln and then transported here. It was not a common material for these soils.
What is interesting, some of you know the Newcomb House in Pleasant Valley. The Newcomb House is a brick building, virtually the same day. All the bricks were dug in the front yard at that pond, and Mrs. Newcomb was terribly indignant because her husband was off fighting with the colonials, and she was stuck with the workmen making those bricks, and every single letter that she sent to her husband reminded him what ordeal she was going through with those bricks digging that pond. So while bricks are rare, there are pockets of clay around, and bricks are used.
I've read someplace that the bricks came from across the road over on that property over there.
But the pond in waterways could very well be, because then you can have documents.
I think it would be unlikely to to the stone house in California, which was the stone was quicker. And then the bricks came right from the country.
Fascinating history, very functional. Well, tonight's real reason for being here is to visit the cemetery. Let's go outside. We'll start our walk. It's a short one, and I just talk and talk and talk and talk. So even though the trip is short, the talk will be very long. So feel free, if your feet get tired or if it gets too dark to see where you're walking, let me know, and I'll be reminded that you can do a part A and part B. We'll come back. After that, we'll have lemonade. We've got some refreshments, thanks to Ginny. And Ginny, you have some comments too.
Well, my comments were, thank you for a great start, that the lemonade that the Greenwood brought, if you're thirsty already, the Greenwood is dehydrating, you're certainly welcome to start. Take a cup of lemonade with you.
Please feel free. Also, many of you know this illustration, and I'm going to have it outside if you want to put it back in. It's taken from Smith's History from the 1880s, but it's actually based on a photograph that was taken during the Civil War. And the Quaker meeting house that we're in is the main building. Outside, I'll show you the configuration of where the other buildings were, and that dictated where the burial sites would be. So I'll take this outside, and anyone prepared to have lemonade, please help yourself, and we'll start the tour. Shortly after 1800, in 1795, Mabbitt sold his property to Coachman Store. Converted into a building. By 1795, Thorns were also operating a store directly across the street. How much before that, I'm not sure. We're also not sure if classes began before the building was actually converted, because there are several stories of individuals who taught in that school conducting classes in private schools.
I noticed there's the hallway, as you go in the doors, there's the hallway, and then there's the hooks there, so they must have hung their coats there. And then, is that just, the hallway for a purpose other than just dividing, so you didn't go directly into the meeting room, or?
It provided an opportunity, so if there are 4 meetings going on, you could go upstairs and not interfere with one.
Okay.
Plus, it also allowed the light to come in through the windows, you see, the privacy in a place. If you had capes and things, you could put them outside. So it really did function.
Yeah, amazing.
Okay. This picture, and you'll see the meeting house, the same configuration. I'm standing in front of this door right now.
Isn't that you there, David?
Yeah, there I am. There's the hat and everything. Right there. See, I haven't changed. To appreciate what you're looking at, there was a shed for carriages that ran along by the little well that you see, the pump well, out towards the road. That's this structure. Between the two, there was a privacy fence, and directly behind the fence is what was called in their minutes a necessary. So the necessary would have been right around the corner. Then, behind the building, where there is currently a garage shed for the vehicles for the cemetery, was the original shed for more horses and wagons, and when we get around to the back you'll see it. So this is pretty much the arrangement. The drawing was based on a photograph, and let me show you the photograph.
I was going to ask you if you have the photograph.
Whitson, thank you. This is the photograph, and I'll pass it around so that you can actually see it.
That was made during the Civil War.
Yeah, Civil War. And all they did was tighten it up. I'll pass it around so you can look close. The white fence, the top of the necessary, the edge of the carriage shed that was over there, and indeed the one in back. So feel free to look around. Part of the property that's of great interest, there is a sundial. The sundial was not originally in that location, it's been shifted, but Willits, Jacob Willits, who's one of the teachers in the school, actually designed it, set it up, and had it cast to this exact location so that it's as accurate as any sundial could be, and it's stamped, if you look at it, has Willits, New York, and the latitude and all that they needed. So that's part of the history. It's been here over 200 years. Another aspect of the property, just to help orient you, on the higher ground was the school, the Nine Partners School that we all hear about, which was the first co-ed boarding school in America. Across the road was the Thorne store, William and Isaac Thorne, from where the Thorne family descended. They were merchants, Quaker merchants. Across the street where the meeting house was, Mabbitt had his store, and there's a lot written about Mr. Mabbitt and his rum, because it caused some problems with the Teamsters coming through. Mr. Mabbitt also is quite a character, and we'll find out a little more about him as we go on the tour. So follow me to the oldest tombstones now, or grave markers that we have. On this side of the green where the locust is. Originally, the Quakers did not use tombstones or grave markers because they saw it as a sign of vanity. The first tombstone in the cemetery then is for a non-Quaker, and that happens to be Treadway. The two tombstones you see. Treadway was actually a doctor who married Philip Hart's daughter, and he died 1826. So the Quakers allowed a tombstone to be erected in his memory, Alfred Treadway. His wife died about 40 years later, one of the wealthiest women in the community, because she amassed all the properties and continued her husband's store and business, and every penny she had went into buying more and more property. The Philip Hart family, as you know, Hart's Village, the house we live in is Philip Hart. Philip Hart's tombstone is right here, 1837, and his wife Susanna. So these are actually the earliest tombstones that are associated with members of the meeting. Alfred Treadway, if you know Jim and Lee Cornell's house, is currently on the market, as a matter of fact. If you look at the round table tonight, it's being listed for $649,000.
I thought it was yours at
Yes.
first.
No, that's actually Jim and Lee's, and Philip Hart. But the one I'd like to have you notice, the row, the first tombstones, some are family members, some are not. But this is Louisa M., wife of Stephen Duell, died January 24th, 1864, aged 23 years, 8 months, 10 days. That tells you something. If you look at the date, it includes the month, January. Some of you already know. What does that mean? She's not a Quaker. The Quakers would not consciously use the pagan names for the days of the week or the months of the year. So it would be first month, fourth day, 6th month, 7th day. You follow? They would avoid any reference. So we know that this young lady at 23 years old was a non-Quaker. If we look at the other stones, none of them are Duell. It's a mystery that I unravel, because her husband never remarried. But if you turn around and see the one statue that we have, that's at his site. And the statue is facing his wife's grave.
When I saw the statue, I was curious. She was a daughter of Hart Village, it says. So she was. And I wondered where it was, because she's not over there with the rest of the family. Is this the Allen?
She had, yes, with the Allens.
Oh, here's Norton Allen.
She had one child, never recovered from giving birth, and died within 6 months. So that one child was married and had children, and that's the other Duels. But that's a connection. It's one of the reasons of the parallel. when you start unraveling the threads, the mysteries in the cemetery are very interesting.
David, would you
Yes.
have any idea why, when she was buried here, that he didn't get a plot for himself in the future? Or?
It's a very, the way we think of it as families and putting them together, that's, at the time, the Quakers wouldn't have thought of it as, it would have been vanity to do something like that, you know? Ultimately, ashes to ashes. So if people die in proximity, well, then it makes sense, but there are lots of individual ones. Within a generation, that's going to change. I also find it interesting that the, directly across, we'll come back to them, the other small ones, they're all the Mabbits, including the Mabbits who had the cemetery, and that's the closest group to the privet, to the privy, or the necessary in the 18th century. They were also under great problems because they were Tory sympathizers, and there was a proclamation that they had to leave. They never did, it was never enforced, but it puts the Mabbitt family from Mabbittsville into a different kind of context. They were, how would we say it, fallen away Quakers? Not so much disowned, but close to. Some other names you'll recognize. The newer tombstones, as they're infilled, because so many of the burial sites did not have stones, you'll find that newer stones are, in newer cemeteries, newer burials are on sites of older ones. And if you ever wanted to find out about that, Kurt for years was in charge of St. Peter's, and he has many very interesting tales of burials on spots that had already been reserved, except no one knew it. Some interesting names and additions. The Nygren name. If you look to Victor Nygren, some of you may remember Victor Nygren delivered milk for the longest time. Mrs. Layton is his daughter. Nygren moved here from, I believe, Finland, no, Norway. And they originally settled in Hyde Park. When they moved from Hyde Park to here, they left before sunrise. Their wagon was loaded. They arrived in Millbrook at sunset. It was virtually a complete day to get from Hyde Park to here, and that was about 1914.
There's still no good way to get from here.
And there's still no good way.
Excuse me, David,
Yes.
is that Bertzel? Is that Ralph Bertzel?
Yeah. Yes.
It is, because I have a tape from about 1981 that we had here with Charlie Tripp and all, and Ralph comes in because he had the keys. He had opened it up for us, and he's telling us a little bit about it. Yeah.
A lot
That's
of,
what he's doing.
as we go through, you're going to have friends and remembrances and maybe even relatives. Please feel free to point them out.
Well, Ralph Bertzel there used to be my bookkeeper when I was supervisor for some years.
Oh, I didn't realize that, Kurt.
Good man.
Wonderful.
Sinkamani, 5 hands. That's translated, Sinkamani means 5 hands.
Oh, really?
Right here, yeah. That's a literal translation, means 5 hands. Yeah, right. Not an octopus, but a quintuplus.
Not 5 fingers, 5 hands.
Okay.
There's a name on that tombstone called Sinkamani. That means 5 hands. Not an octopus, but a 5
Where that flag is there. See that little flag? See the back, that he still
The
doesn't
next
have
up,
it
let's
yet.
actually walk over to the well.
Oh, place.
Yes, lots of places. Is Isaac's wife, 1534. And I'm assuming that this, in context, is the next generation. Because this I don't know. If anyone knows, that's the configuration for
When
I'm
you look
sorry,
around, you
excuse me.
find names like Swift and Kate and Golly, all the Quaker names that have descended down to us today. They're various branches of the family. Downing, I'm looking now, the Downing connection, Edgar Downing, you may know the apple orchard. Isaac Merrick's house is going to be where we have tea this July. Barbara Nolan is the current owner. Many of you know it though as Downing's Orchard for many, many years, but originally it was Isaac Merritt's home. And we'll come up with the date for that and look for your listing and the mailing of that, and we'll confirm, but that's going to be probably towards the end of July that you'll be invited there for tea.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
David. Now, is that Swift? Is that the family that had that Swift, like the coffee grinder and all of
Mariah
that?
Swift, the bigger family, they're all Swifts. You've got Swifts, Ironmongery, they did the coffee mills, the Swifts, lumber yard, which was actually behind where the Washington liquor store is now. Some of you may remember that a long time ago. Kurt might remember that as a lumber yard. Lots of Swifts. As a matter of fact, talking about business, I'd like the association to come over here for a minute. And it's almost like being in the village. Lots of names. You know, the sailor, Mr. Sayer was in charge of the ice house for Charles Dietrich. He was also president of the village and had his hands in the politics for a number of years. But Tom Fiore, many of you know Tom. Tom is a young man with his father carried ice for Mr. Saylor, and it's the apartments now on Harts Village Road. It's the tallest building in the town of Washington, 8 stories. That helps to put it in context. DeGarris, you see the sign DeGarris. Mr. DeGarris was a very popular dentist who lived in the Donaldson house. He purchased his building from the Donaldsons, First Bank resident, and it's where the village library is now. That was actually in the front yard of Mr. DeGarris's. Kurt, do you remember Mr. DeGarris at all?
No, I really don't.
Okay.
I must have been that high.
Right. He sold the business to Dr. Mackenzie.
Okay. Well, I knew him well.
And Mackenzie's, that's another name and family connection. Some other names, Shaw. Henry Shaw was a blacksmith for many, many years in the village. Welling, the Welling name. Frank Welling was a builder. A lot of the buildings in the village were created by him. Chereau, farm family, lots of Chereaus. Many of them are in Pleasant Valley now. But a lot of the names, over
This
200
Tripp
years.
used to be the, years ago,
Yes.
the butcher, Tripp and Hicks.
Yes, Tripp and Hicks for it, and Charlie Tripp. I actually, Charlie and I had a long conversation this morning because I was sitting right on his headstone saying, now Charlie, help me out, da-da-da-da-da-da. So we had a good conversation going. Charlie, if you remember, was a delight. He was the first baptism in Grace Church when it was consecrated, and he said that with great pride. He was a strong supporter of the Town of Washington Historical Society, and just a wonderful, wonderful person. We all grew knowing Charlie.
And he was president for, I don't know how many terms.
How many terms?
That's
He'd be
wonderful.
very happy that we're...
Our last trip here, I have a tape of Charlie explaining everything.
Wonderful.
Yeah, been a good man.
And through extensions, you'll find there are a number of Tripps and Hicks. The Birch family, another farm family. Let's see. Woolheater, you may know Woolheater is a builder.
Oh, yeah, the plumber.
And plumber. Did tinning, tinsmithing, and roofing. So a lot of local businesses. Oh,
The Bacons,
and
Ruth and Catherine.
yeah, yes, and the bacon and bacon plant. Another one that I happen to love, G. Howard Davison. If you know Altamont Farm, this year's calendar that the Conservation Commission did features a fabulous beauty on the cover. She won lots of awards. Purity was her name, and she was owned by G. Howard Davison. Look at the bit of poetry, and I went around looking to find poems that were written, and among the many, these are my favorite inscriptions. This is the longest. Under the wide and stormy sky, dig the grave and let me lie. Glad did I live and gladly die, and I laid me down with a will. This is the verse you grieve for me. Here he lies where he longs to be. Home is the sailor, home from the sea, and the hunter, home from the hill. Died in England, and again, a very, very dedicated member of our community, and many of the pictures in our calendar were from the stocks, the cattle, the sheep that he owned, that gave the town of Washington a recognition. Here are some other ones, though. Yes.
When we used to have the parade years ago on the 4th of July, he could still wear his World War I uniform at the back.
Fabulous. In terms of quotes, these are some of the ones that I found interesting. This is in contrast to Howard Davison's I Did It My Way. That was Hetty's, and you'll see that. There are some others, though. There are a number that are safe in the arms of Jesus. That's a pretty standard one. But Frank Welling, the Welling family that you see in the distance, the builder, his wife had this put on their stone: "Sleep on, beloved." And
There's an aria there.
and here's another one I think is sweet. Ackroyd, some of you may, because she died recently, and their children put, "Mom, sing with the angels."
Dave, would you know Sailor Charlotte Bennett's father, the ice guy?
Yes.
Yeah. That's
That's
his
it.
stone.
That's his
Okay.
stone. A few others from Lord Byron: "A mind at peace with all below." Or, and we'll see this one later, is the most unusual, I think: "When the earth shall claim your limbs, then shall you truly dance." And that's Cahill Gibran. And then Sally Gifford O'Brien, and I relate very much to Sally, and we all love Sally dearly. My tombstone has my name and my birth date on it. Sally's does as well. There are a few of us around who do things like that and don't think of it as being morbid. Sally did the same thing, but she did one better. This is what she had engraved on hers: "A good laugh is sunshine in a house."
Didn't she have SOB in parentheses?
So these are some of my favorite ones, but the diversity is really interesting. Okay, moving right along. Yes, follow me. I mentioned Welling. This is the Frank Welling with "Sleep On, Beloved" that I mentioned. And then the wife is "Asleep in Jesus." But I just love that as a comment.
Here the stones are aimed in a different direction from the
Yeah, they shift around. An interesting one, we all know the Thorne family, and Isaac Thorne and the progenitors of the Thorne dynasty. These are all Thorne stones. Jonathan and Lydia Thorne. Jonathan Thorne is the one for whom the Thorne Memorial Building was dedicated. 9 of their children died. We don't think of the fatalities of that generation, but most of these are children of Jonathan and Lydia Thorne. And the uncle,
Isn't that amazing?
actually ran that Quaker store across the road.
What's that little one there? Is that a child?
That's a child's. That's a later one. It's not part of the Thorne group. The dates,
Like this bunch of children.
yeah, the range, most of them are 1840s and 50s.
Okay, these are not the 43, 42.
Jonathan Thorne. Yeah, they were. That many of them died. Yeah.
Oh, I see. The building is in their memory, not
Yes.
donated one.
DeGarrett's Trip, Henry Shaw, Blacksmith, Frank Welling, Birch. Okay, next site we're going to be going to. I found it unusual that these were the thorns and I couldn't find the others, but they're here. And at the end of the trip, as we circle around, you'll see where the next generation of thorns were.
That's the Davison stone.
Excuse me?
There's two red stones over top.
Yes.
I thought they were down here.
No, we'll come across them. Bennett School. This is the woman whose inspiration and dedication produced what arguably was the most famous school for generations of young women, the Bennett School. May Friend Bennett converted the Davison Halcyon Hotel into the school in 1907. So this is May Bennett.
And on her, the day of her funeral, at 3 p.m., all the businesses in Millville closed. Just a little trivia.
No, that's what it is. Everyone share, please. A few things. Elmy, the column, Reverend Elmy was the Baptist minister. Matawan, for many years, he worked in Matawan. We'll see a number of ministers who chose this cemetery as their final resting place. The complex, we're not going to walk to it, but the third set in, a very, very important person, third row down, Benjamin Pisey. For those of you who know anything about the Pisey family, Mr. Pisey was also a plumber, and virtually every estate, every major building, the Thorne Memorial School, anything that had to do with plumbing, it was Mr. Pisey's business that put them in. He was an extraordinarily gifted plumber. He started off as a tinsmith and welder, and it was his dedication that also brought the what is now Village Hall to the community. He was an active member in the temperance movement and the Christian, help me out with the initials, the W, but it wasn't the women's group, it was the Christian Association, YMCA, thank you, that's it, the YMCA, which was our Village Hall. He was instrumental in it. Some of you may remember Mr. Pisey.
David, before you start up
Yes.
the hill, I just wanted to mention that down there, further, there's a big stone down there for the Britton family. And John Britton, the man who was a slave boy who was found in Tennessee and brought north after the Civil War, is buried down there with a lot of other Brittons. And we were going to perhaps mention some people that didn't know where they were. Peter Britton, who lives right over here in a little, very ancient house on Altamont Road, that was his grandfather. His great-grandmother, Duncan, or grandfather Duncan, was also a slave who was bought in New York City as a child and brought up here. He lived to be 100, I've read that. He lived to be 100, but I don't know where he's buried. Haven't been able to find that one.
And are all those other Britons down there descendants of?
He had 7 daughters, and they're all there. His wife and the 7 daughters. And Peter has a sister up north.
The next set of stones we're going to be looking at are actually behind May Bennett. We talked about the curious way of dating tombstones with Quakers. The latest Quaker dated tombstone that I found, there may be another one that's escaped me, happens to be on Caroline Haviland. Aunt Carrie, some of you know, the house that we're in, the Hunt Otis house, it was actually Carrie Haviland who inherited it. She was born in the 1850s. She lived in the house through 1949. I stand corrected. Yes, 1949. And Hunt, her great-nephew, inherited the property. But notice, 1949, and it's still listed as 8th month 24th, 1857, died 8th month 20th, 1949. It's a great Quaker tradition. Barclay Haviland, Isaac Haviland, all the other Havilands that are part of the Philip Hart descendants are in this section in this row.
Does Willis have one here too, or not?
And a Willis, there are 2 or 3 Willis Havilands. We have a Willis Haviland connection because there's a stone that has been uncovered that is also a Willis Haviland. The Willis that's here is the nephew, I think, of your stone.
Okay, well, I just wondered if he was buried here, and they brought an old stone, because that's what they did sometimes too. They brought old stones when they replaced them. So that's why I wondered if there was one here.
And it's very possible.
Really? No, was just out in back.
And it may have been recycled, which is what we do a lot. We're going to be walking through now. You'll see Swifts, the Swift family, and the Bedells and the Haights. We're going to come up in this section right to America. I want to show you the next one.
David, excuse me, could you explain again why the Quakers use, instead of using like January or whatever, they
All
use
the months of the calendar are based on Greek and or Roman gods. Janus, January. Janus is the god that looks back and to the future. And Monday, Tuesday, the evil god Tuz. And Wednesday is God Wednesday, and Thirst is the god Thirst, and Fry is the god Fry, and Sat is the god Sat. No, they're all variations of Greco-Roman. That's why they're avoided.
Okay, thank you. Thursday.
Fabulous. They all are. A lot of you, another association, cemeteries, you'll notice them. It's not an accident that some of the oldest trees in cemeteries are cedars. Goes right back to the Old Testament and Solomon, the cedars of Lebanon. And there are many, many references to the cedars. Lebanon produced the major wood for the ancient world. It was completely covered. It was a dense forest. And Solomon, many songs talk about the cedars of Lebanon. A cedar represents tradition, so a lot of cemeteries would have cedars planted as part of the in memoriam, if you will, for longevity. We'll be going now to this section. Again, as we go through, you'll recognize the name Three. We're coming up to Merritt. The Merritt family came to this part of Dutchess County from Quaker Hill. Aiken and Merritt were old Quaker names from the 18th century. Their children married into the Harts families and the Coffins, so there was a lot of commerce back and forth. And Franklin Merritt, Stephen Merritt rather, this man, in 1922, Dutchess County Historical Society had a pilgrimage, and it was Stephen Merritt who led the group and talked about his remembrances as a boy, and they were published by the Dutchess County Historical Society, and it's one of the first person accounts we have from someone whose recollections go back through the 19th century. The second one was not published, and that's a coffin manuscript, and Carmine refers to his stories. It was done a few years before Stephen Merritt, but that's Stephen Merritt's importance for local history, the recollections. McQuaid, names if you remember, the paper store, John Kading actually started working for them in the high school, and has carried on that tradition for over 50 years, but that was McQuaid's. We're now going to go up to the top. If you see Reardon, James Reardon, this is a bit of a hike, but hopefully we can all make it. James Reardon was president of the bank. He was also president of the Millbrook Improvement Society, and the village and its division of property went through his aegis for a great many years. We also know it, of course, as Reardon Briggs, because that was another hat he wore. When we get up to the top, I'll point out that row of stones. Now, it's difficult to play Solomon and decide which stones to point out and which ones to walk by, because every stone has a story, every family has a tradition. Having said that, there are some people whose influence in the community stand very large indeed, and James Reardon is one of those individuals. As bank president, as overseer for the division of the village and the sales of property, working within the politics, working within the structure, very, very important person. And he sat on the school board for a number of years, so it's very appropriate that Prof. Anderson who was for more than 50 years the head of the school district, is just behind him. That's the Anderson connection for it. But if we look through, this entire section is filled with extraordinary people. Lyle, for Lyle Federated Church, he headed the Dutch Reform, and in his honor, the Federated Church was named after him. He did much to bring the community together. If we walk down just a little bit, we're going to be coming back this way.
These must have all been put in recently, looks like.
1860, I don't know, maybe just cleaned or something?
Oh, maybe.
And depending upon the type of
Just about
stone.
every name here has a light. For anyone who loves local history, these are all friends. From Dr. Pingree. Dr. Pingree was the first doctor in 1870 to set up practice in the newly created village of Millbrook. He was succeeded by the Mackenzies, 3 different doctors. Whenever you mention Mackenzie, you're going to have your favorite, whoever it may be, 3 generations. Gilbert Mackenzie, David Mackenzie, and Gordon Mackenzie. The Tildsleys, the newspapers. Edna is also, her stone is also here, so she's part of that configuration of people who believe that to be practical and have the names on the stones as well. The Birch Benham connection, I'll let Ginny talk about that. Ginny?
Well, you mentioned a birch back there. There were 3 Birch brothers who came to this area. Well, they've been around the United States for a long time. Came to this area. James had a store in Mabbittsville, and I think he was the one down there. And my uncle, Albert Birch, had a store here in Millbrook, the Millbrook department store. He had that for about 35, 40 years. And then my grandfather, the other Birch one, went up to Columbia County. He had a store also. But this is my uncle. My mother lived with them for probably 15 years and married there. And so when they put their stone up, they said, you and your husband are going to be married with us. I think. So there are a number of family members there, my mother and father, and Lizzie and Albert Birch. Thank you.
The legacy. As we run along the back, just about every name is going to be important as part of history. Many of you know the Collins family. Toby Collins' father and mother are here.
Mrs. Collins isn't deceased yet.
No, but her stone. She's another one. There's names on the stone. Yes.
She's glad you clarified.
Yes, clarified. Thank you for clarifying.
Unless something happened that I wasn't aware of.
The Thorns and the Partials, Oakley Thorns and Generations, they're in back with it, right next to the Andersons. There are lots of names you may associate. If you have any stories you'd like to tell about them, please feel free to. The Dyson family and the Perkins, relatively latecomers to the community, but this is the Dyson, Charles Dyson and Ann Dyson, their daughter, who's the most recent addition to that.
And Margaret's there.
George Perkins, the Perkins family, the Cross by the Tree, Walbridge Farm, are also part of the connection.
Mrs. Partial was a very generous person to all churches. I know she donated the organ to St. Joseph's, and I believe did she give an organ or money for an organ for Grace Church? Or I know she was very generous to all the churches in the village.
Many of the benefactors were. They supported each of the denominations and gave to the entire community.
Colin.
Colin. Yeah, Grace. Okay, thank you. I know the wing window behind the column, behind the organ. Moving along, some other names. The
He's
Hist.
around. He's around, yeah. Okay. I haven't seen him in a dog so.
Bonacue, of course. The Bonacue family. Senator Bonacue, Jesse, Tim Bonacue's family, for those of you who know Tim. have a nomination for the most unusual. That's a judgment call. But in my feeling, this is going to be the most unusual, so follow me. Know it. And this is what I consider the most unusual one in the cemetery. Now, you may consider others, but this is the poem that I had read earlier for Khalil Gibran, and if you're of a certain age, you read him in school and was very impressed by him. But this is it. It's the Ewing family. And I'd love to find out who did the piece of sculpture because there's no name on it. But if you look close, it's a wailing woman.
You know, when did she die?
1966.
Yeah, well, you know,
69.
1969.
You know, she was on a trip with Alex Ewing in Africa someplace, climbing mountains, and she got this terrible disease. And she died there, and they brought her home.
Oh, my
Very
word.
sad. She was a lovely person. Very
That was
sad.
quite untimely, huh?
Oh, yeah, it was very untimely.
Yeah,
I remember that well.
38.
69. Gosh.
Yeah, she was a lovely
38 years
girl.
old. Not even 38 yet.
So you may have others that are more, that may speak to you more than this one, or are more monumental, or more impressive. But this to me is certainly one of the contenders for most unusual.
Well, especially if she was climbing a mountain. Right.
Mm-hmm.
When it actually happened.
She got some disease from the pressures, you know, the height of the mountains.
And that makes the quote even more important. And then the last, we've got two others we'll be looking at. The Gifford, Sally Gifford O'Brien, if you'd like to see hers. Sunset from the west, above the cedars, or behind the cedars, to look at the Gifford complex. Sally's, of course, A Good Laugh is Sunshine in a House from Thackeray. Her father's, Home is the Sailor, Home from the Sea, and the Hunter from the Hill. We saw the Donaldson one a few minutes ago, half hour ago, the complete one. The mother's, A Mind at Peace with All Below, A Heart Whose Love is Innocent. And lastly, for Bill, everyone remembers Bill, his, I think is very appropriate too. Faithfulness, Family, and Integrity.
I can't believe it's only 7 years ago. I thought it was only a few.
He's a good guy.
Yeah. Good guy, good family. And for those of you who don't know the location, Gifford House at the Cary Arboretum is her family home. The last one we're going to be going to, Ginny, yes, you were looking.
Well, I was just curious about this stone, which is so close to the others. Do you know if there's any connection between the Whitmans and...
Yes, it is one.
Dave, I would suspect that when Sally meets her maker, she's going to insist that no date be put on that. So 100 years from now, everybody's wondering.
Where is she? Yes. Good God. That's really wicked. That's odd.
With the configuration. The last one is a non-site, but for the Historical Society, it's very important, and that's Carmine's. And let us show you where Carmine, on the corner actually, to see the comparison. But remember we were talking about headers and stretchers? Yeah. So you've got headers, stretcher, stretcher, headers, stretcher, stretcher. If you look around the side, you'll see what the other pattern is. This is Carmine's flag. And this is where Carmine is buried. The decision was made by the association, the Nine Partners Association, that Carmine, who had given so much of his life to local history and was fiercely dedicated to Lisle Federated Church and to this building in particular, for a number of years he sat on the governing board, could be the exception that proves the rule. No one is buried closer to the building. You can see the line that runs through, except Carmine. And this is where we're collecting money for eventually to have a stone to indicate who he was and what he did for local history and the Historical Society. So in the future, when we take a trip like this, whoever is around to lead it or be a part of it, they will end up here and remember Carmine. When we do St. Peter's Church, we'll be talking about Louise Tompkins, and certainly Carmine is in that Louise. Let's look at the
David, it looks like you're...
This is a tape recorder.
Depending on, it's sort of unusual, but these were designed as coffin doors, so that for burial purposes, the wagon could come right in and you could take the coffin right into the meeting house for your service. You didn't have to worry about trying to get around aisles and up and over staircases.
Is that a men and women? Women's
There are
doors?
two of them. I'm not sure why there are two of them other than the symmetry of the back, but that's how they were used.
And you have to be pretty little.
There's no base.
2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1.
2 on 2. Let's look at the front. Thank you. Thank you.
David, you know in fact,
yes.
some of them are 2 and then 1, except the one you pointed to, and that was 3. 3, yes.
3, okay. Now look at the front.
There's just one that's 3.
If you look at the front of the design, maybe it's the other two sides. This is consistently alternating. Do you see? Header, stretcher, header, stretcher.
Yes,
header, stretcher, all the way up. So on the front facade, you follow what I'm saying? On the front facade, they made it very elaborate. Let me look at the other side.
I guess they thought it was
I had thought all
fancier.
3 were like this. No, it rotates, yes. It's only the front.
Yeah, it's only the front is, well, that makes sense.
It's only the front that's alternating, stretcher, header, and then on the sides, I had thought it was the sides too, but the sides it alternates to a much easier kind of bond. Yes?
Looking up at the pieces of metal up there across the
Yes. That's very important. You may have noticed the void on the inside of that building. From an engineering point of view, you've got the outside of a box, but you don't have any support tying the box together. So if you imagine a cardboard box over time, the box is going to billow out and sag. The only way you can avoid that is if you cable it. And very often the shapes are stars, and you may have seen stars, and more elaborate, it actually looks like a star. It's nothing more than an anchor, and there's a toggle bolt that runs from that point all the way through the building to the other side, and then they're tightened up. So it's the cable that's holding the gable ends together so that the building doesn't stretch and collapse.
And that would have been built right in.
Right into it. It's the nature of brick buildings. Philadelphia, more elaborate ones, they can be very decorative, and those star pattern now are very collectible. As you tear down warehouses, some of them are very elaborate, they'll have dates and markers in them, so you could spend a couple $100s for them.
Pleasant Valley.
David?
Aren't there some there's a shape. Isn't there? There's some there, I think.
Anywhere you're going to have a stone building, you'll find them. It's the nature of keeping the building together.
Look at the...
Yes.
You get them built today. How in 10 years the concrete's coming out?
Yep. No, that's true. And another thing from brick technology, the way bricks were fired, obviously you're putting them into high stress, high heat situation with an exposed fire. You think of a great kiln, a big oven, and brick is ultimately a composite made with sand, and if it gets too hot, sand will melt and you get glass. Anytime you think the black is where the clay got too hot and it started to melt. So what you've got is an actual glazing in it. In some buildings, those glazing features, in the Dutch tradition, you can have that pattern where the glaze feature actually creates sort of a herringbone or a pattern, but that accounts for the difficulties. And the imperfections, when you see little pockets and holes, that could be imperfections. There may have been little bug on the inside of it who couldn't compete with the temperatures and at some point popped.
If you look at the concrete, it's still in there.
Yeah. With the pointing, yeah.
It may have been repointed a little bit.
And there's maintenance that can happen too, of course. What's up in the attic? Nothing. Nothing that I know of. There may be a friendly squirrel or two, but that's it. Well, if anyone would like more lemonade and cookies, please feel free. Come in if you'd like to sit down for a bit.
David, thank you very much.
Yeah, it was wonderful, David.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
all for coming.
Thank you. It was great.
Thank you, and hopefully it piqued your curiosity for it.
Yes.
Next year we're going to be doing St. Joe's Cemetery, by the way.
Oh, good. David, the holes under the,
That's
just for air?
That's
This-
for air circulation.
And that goes all the way through the other
All the way
side?
through. There's no basement.
Okay.
It's just an airspace. You need that for the humidity.
Yes,
Otherwise,
yes.
you'll do things.
Yeah. But I think that this is up here for now. This was
200 years old.
Over 200.
over 200 years old and unbelievable.
Wait, yeah, when you see something like that, that's a downspout.
Oh, okay. That's where the downspout came down. Yeah.
Yeah, originally.
Oh, and I had another question, David. Now, it says every Sunday now they have a service here at 9 o'clock.
Yes.
And it used to, when did that start? Do you know?
Within Carmine was still live. It's the current minister
I thought it was only during the summer.
during the summer. Yeah, fair weather because it's not heated.
Yeah.
Prior to that, every year they would have one service.
Right.
But with the current minister, they do it every Sunday because it's so popular.
Oh, really? So actually it's the Federated Church that?
Yes.
Oh, the Federated Church comes out and they have a service
Yeah,
here?
and service isn't quite the right word. It's more of a meeting because it's not a led service. You may have a hymn and you talk in the Quaker tradition.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Well, yes.
Have you been to service here?
Jean, you said you just mentioned that music is not in the Quaker tradition, and yet there is an old organ in there.
Yeah, I know, and that could be brought in from somewhere else. Because I know it's been in there for a long time, but of course they didn't use music in those days, and organs would have come in the 1800s. So, and the hymnals there are old hymnals from the Federated Church.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's very